You're scrolling through headlines when Sophie Rain's response lights up every feed. After Michael Porter Jr. cast doubt on her reported $82 million earnings, she claps back with a sharp comparison. Men can dribble a ball for $30 million a year without anyone questioning legitimacy. But when a woman builds a business from the ground up and surpasses those numbers, suddenly it becomes a moral debate. The remark doesn't just answer Porter Jr. It's skepticism. It reframes the entire conversation around value, work, and double standards. Her words land with the sting of truth, exposing the contrast in how success is measured. Athletes in the NBA, celebrated for their contracts and endorsements, rarely face criticism for the scale of their paychecks. But Rain's earnings, achieved through a digital business empire she created and scaled on her own, draw scrutiny and doubt. In her eyes, that isn't coincidence. It's proof of a cultural bias that treats women's financial power as suspect. Inside the social media storm, reactions are instant. Supporters echo her point, noting that talent in any form, whether on the court or in commerce, deserves recognition. Critics fire back, insisting that comparisons between sports and her business are misplaced. But regardless of which side people land on, her clap back shifts the spotlight. Instead of defending her wealth, she calls out the double standard that put her on trial in the first place. And now the question comes to you. If society celebrates men for earning millions through entertainment, why is it that when a woman generates even greater success through entrepreneurship, her legitimacy is the one up for debate? The foundation of Sophie Rain's clap back rests on the journey she often describes as starting from nothing. Long before her name was tied to multi-million-dollar headlines, she was experimenting with small online ventures, learning how to brand herself, and understanding how digital platforms could be turned into global businesses. What began with individual content creation evolved into an empire of partnerships, subscription services, and direct-to-consumer sales that eventually scaled far beyond what critics believed possible. Court filings and financial documents referenced in interviews show her revenue streams spread across multiple verticals: paid subscriptions, merchandise, licensing deals, and even consultancy for others looking to replicate her model. Unlike traditional celebrity wealth, which often comes from contracts negotiated by agents or massive organizations, Rain's rise is built on self-management and control of her intellectual property. Every step has been part of a strategy she shaped herself. Supporters highlight this as the exact point behind her rebuttal. She isn't simply comparing her earnings to NBA players. She's reminding critics that her wealth was built without billion-dollar franchises backing her. No coaches, no leagues, no sponsorship machinery to guarantee a payday. Just a system she constructed and scaled on her own. That independence, she argues, is the real measure of accomplishment. The contrast makes her pushback against Porter Jr.'s comments even sharper. If athletes can sign contracts worth hundreds of millions without raising moral outrage, why should a woman who built a digital platform be forced to defend her success in public? And that leads to a larger question. Does the way Sophie Rain built her wealth make her more deserving of recognition? Or does the very fact that it disrupts traditional paths to money ensure she'll always face skepticism? The storm began when Michael Porter Jr., an NBA player accustomed to the scrutiny and spotlight of professional sports, openly questioned Sophie Rain's reported $82 million in earnings. His remarks weren't delivered with the weight of official inquiry, but with the casual skepticism that often surrounds women who claim financial success at this level. To Rain, and to many watching, that skepticism was the problem. The implication wasn't just doubt about numbers, it was doubt about legitimacy. In the echo chamber of sports and entertainment media, Porter Jr.'s comments struck a chord because they reflected a wider narrative, that when men cash in, their wealth is celebrated. But when women do the same, it's interrogated. For some, his words carried the undertone of a double standard that has followed female entrepreneurs for years. To others, it was an honest question about transparency in an industry not fully understood. Either way, it lit the fuse. Rain's response, blunt, unapologetic, and sharp, turned his casual comment into a national talking point. By contrasting his NBA salary with the empire she built, she shifted the frame from his doubt to society's bias. The clap back resonated precisely because it exposed more than a personal attack. It highlighted how criticism often falls differently depending on who is holding the wealth. The exchange also reveals something deeper about perception. Porter Jr. didn't just question a number, he opened a debate about what types of success are deemed valid. And in firing back, Rain placed herself in the center of that debate, forcing both her critics and supporters to confront uncomfortable truths. And now the spotlight shifts to you. When someone questions wealth earned outside of traditional systems, is it fair skepticism? Or is it a reflection of hidden biases about who deserves to be rich? The fallout from Sophie Rain's response was immediate, and the public reaction split sharply. On one side, supporters praised her for saying out loud what many had long felt, that women's financial achievements are treated differently, measured with suspicion rather than celebration. Social media timelines lit up with posts defending her, pointing to her consistency in building a business model that others have tried and failed to replicate. To them, her clap back wasn't just a defense of herself. It was a defense of women who fight to legitimize their success in a world where male earnings rarely face the same interrogation. But critics weren't quiet either. Some argued that Michael Porter Jr.'s skepticism reflected questions many already had, not about her gender but about the transparency of her industry. They suggested that Reigns' comparison to sports wasn't fair, pointing out that athletes' salaries are public record, while much of her income is tied to private platforms and unverifiable claims. In their eyes, her fiery response was more of a deflection than an explanation, raising even more questions about whether the $82 million figure was accurate. The divide underscored the very issue Reigns had called out. The debate wasn't just about numbers, it was about trust. Why do audiences readily trust institutions like the NBA, but hesitate to trust an entrepreneur who runs her own empire? For Reigns' supporters, that hesitation is rooted in bias. For her critics, it's simply due diligence. What's clear is that her words forced a conversation that stretched far beyond her and Porter Jr. The clash became a cultural flashpoint about credibility, gender, and the ways we measure success. And now the challenge falls to you. When public opinion splits this sharply, do you side with those who see Reigns' defense as justified, or with those who believe questioning her wealth is a matter of accountability, not bias? The exchange with Michael Porter Jr. did more than spark headlines. It reshaped Sophie Reigns' public image. Before, she was known primarily as a digital entrepreneur with staggering earnings, a figure discussed in articles and whispered about in forums, but not widely recognized as a cultural voice. After her clap back, she became something more, a symbol in a debate about legitimacy, gender, and the way society reacts to wealth that doesn't come from traditional paths. Supporters began to frame her not just as a successful businesswoman, but as someone standing up against double standards. Memes circulated quoting her words about athletes earning millions without judgment, contrasted against the skepticism she faced. For many, she became a kind of spokesperson for women carving their own lanes, someone who refused to be shamed for breaking into a financial stratosphere, historically reserved for men. Critics, however, argued that the transformation was intentional, that Reigns leaned into controversy to solidify her brand. They suggested that positioning herself as a lightning rod wasn't about defending fairness, but about capitalizing on outrage to extend her reach. Still, whether calculated or not, the effect was undeniable. She was no longer just a business case study. She was a cultural talking point. The incident also changed how media framed her. Coverage shifted from quiet profiles of her financial rise to sharp debates on national outlets about credibility, gender expectations, and the blurred lines between entertainment and entrepreneurship. Porter Jr.'s skepticism might have triggered the story, but Reigns' fiery response made sure it grew beyond one NBA player's comment. And now you're left with a question. Is Sophie Reigns' new role as a cultural symbol a natural extension of her success, or a deliberate reinvention to make her wealth untouchable in the eyes of the public? The clash between Sophie Reigns and Michael Porter Jr. quickly expanded beyond their names, tapping into a cultural debate that has simmered for years. At its core is a simple but uncomfortable question. What kinds of success do we celebrate, and what kinds do we question? When an athlete signs a $200 million contract, the public might argue about value, but few demand proof that the money exists. When a woman builds a business from scratch and reports earnings that rival or exceed those figures, skepticism often comes first. This pattern isn't new. Analysts point to how traditional industries, sports, finance, entertainment, have long been framed as legitimate pathways to wealth, while newer digital models are treated with suspicion, especially when women are at the forefront. Reigns' sharp response brought that contrast into full view. To her supporters, it exposed a cultural bias that holds women to a different standard. To her critics, it highlighted the risks of a world where wealth claims can be inflated without the same transparency as a league contract. The timing only fueled the debate. In an era where self-made fortunes on digital platforms are becoming more common, the argument over legitimacy isn't just about Sophie Reigns. It's about whether society is ready to accept new models of wealth creation as valid, or whether the old gatekeepers still define what success looks like. For Reigns, the fallout has placed her at the center of that cultural shift, willingly or not. She is now being used as a case study in classrooms, debated in media panels, and dissected online by those who see her either as a trailblazer or as a symbol of unproven claims. And so the bigger question comes back to you. Are we witnessing the unfair scrutiny of a woman who broke barriers, or the rightful demand for accountability in a new era of money-making that challenges the traditions we've always trusted? By the time the dust settled, Sophie Reigns' words had done more than defend her own fortune. They ignited a broader reckoning about money, gender, and legitimacy. Her response to Michael Porter Jr. wasn't just about one NBA player's doubt. It was about drawing a line in the sand. She compared the unquestioned millions paid to athletes with the skepticism she faced for building a business from scratch, and in doing so she turned a single confrontation into a cultural moment. Her critics still argue that transparency matters, that massive earnings claims in unregulated industries should always be tested. Her supporters insist that no such standard is applied when men in sports or entertainment announce their paychecks, and that the constant questioning of women's wealth exposes an old double standard that hasn't gone away. Both sides see themselves as defending fairness. Both are convinced the other side is missing the point. What's undeniable is that Sophie Rain has shifted the conversation. She is no longer just a digital entrepreneur reported to have earned staggering sums. She has become a lightning rod in a debate about what success looks like, and whose success deserves to be respected without caveats. Whether you see her as a trailblazer or a provocateur, her clapback ensured that this argument will stretch far beyond her name. And now the final question is yours. When someone claims extraordinary success outside traditional systems, should we measure them by the same trust we give to established industries, or will new paths to wealth always be met with doubt, especially when it's a woman leading the way?